All right, good afternoon to everybody. We will continue with our discussion on attributes of God. Uh, Day before yesterday, we started this discussion and we looked at God's attributes, omnipotence and omnibenevolence, and also noticed some of the difficulties we are faced with when we attribute these qualities to God or anybody actually. Basically, we started omnipotence, and then there was this classic question about can God will to do something logically impossible and so on. And then there was this classical objection to the attribute has been presented by Averroes. He asked whether God can create a stone that he cannot lift. And then in that, I was trying to explain to you, although it has been among us for a long time, because Averroes is a middle-age philosopher who presented this argument, can God create a stone so heavy that he cannot lift itself. And now, I would like you to think really, what would be your answer to that type of question? You know, like, okay, so, you know, we say that God can do anything. And then if you ask this kind of question, can God create a stone that he cannot lift by himself? Now, in a way, it looks like if you say yes, then God can create a stone, but he cannot lift it. So that means there is at least one thing that God cannot do. So then God is not omnipotent. But on the other hand, if you right away say that no, God cannot create, that means then there is again at least one thing God cannot do. Then again God is not omnipotent. So, you know, this appears to be a serious challenge to the concept of God. But on the other hand, those who say that this challenge is not a real challenge, you know, they also have some reasoning. And I also seem to think that if you say the same sentence in somewhat different manner, then you can see why this challenge is not a real challenge. Now, in the second paragraph, I have put it in a different manner. Can God do something that he cannot do? Now, is there any meaning of that sentence? If you reword that question, can God create a stone that he cannot create? If you rephrase that question, can God do something that he cannot do? Then the second sentence is it meaningful? Can you meaningfully ask, can God do something that he cannot do? Is it a meaningful statement? Now, you know what, when we study this kind of subject, it is important for you to think, what will be your answer? What will be your answer? Because all of us can answer these questions, because, you know, these questions are posed by human beings like us. So we must be able to use our reasoning. So this is why one way to, you know, look at this question will be, when you look at the question originally, can God create a stone so heavy that God could not lift it? Well, it is puzzling. But if you rephrase it, can God do something that he cannot do? That second sentence seems to be completely meaningless, right? So anyhow, you know, this debate has been there. So this is one of the classical objection against the. And then last paragraph, another challenge for this attribute is the existence of evil in the world. If God is both omnibenevolent and omnipotent, evil cannot exist in the world. Now, when you say God can do anything, God is absolutely good, then there is a problem. So omnibenevolence. Now omnibenevolence is God is all good. Now if God is completely good, if God can do anything, then there is a question why God created this world. Why God could not create any better world? Why God created this world with suffering? Things like that you can ask. Okay, then we were continuing to this. Then day before yesterday, we were discussing this finally, omniscience. God is all-knowing. Now what do we mean by this? Omniscience, God knows all. God knows everything. God is said to know all that should be known. If God knows everything, including future, what will happen to the free will of people? Now, interesting thing is, one question that arises, if we say that God knows everything, then God knows the past, God knows the present, and also God knows the future, right? If God knows future, then that means that whatever we are doing tomorrow, day after tomorrow, another 1 year, everything has been already determined. Determined in the sense there is an exact way that it happens. So for someone to know it, we can argue that it must be already set, right? Otherwise you can say, how can God see that? So if you can want to say that God sees the past, okay, because past is past now. So it has already happened, so no problem. And God sees present, presently what is happening, we can say again that is okay too. But what about the future? When we say God knows future, in order to know future, future must be already in the present. Isn't it? Future must be already in the present for him to see. Future must be in the present. For God to see that. So then the issue is that what will happen to the free will? So actually this whole question of determinism and free will. Now in philosophical discussion, in religious discussions, we talked about determinism. And then we also talked about the idea of free will. Now determinism means the human life is determined. Determined means already determined, already known. Now we have different types of determinism. Now sometimes Buddhists believe that, for example, that everything happens according to my karma. So my karma means my past karma. So if everything happens according to my past karma, because my past karma is past, so past determines the future. So that means I can't escape, because all my past karma is are those that determine my present situation. So that is called, we can call karma determinism. Okay? Now that is a form of one determinism. So there are several types of determinism. Natural determinism, sometimes modern science believe in genetic determinism, because our genes, scientists say that you can't change. But if you change the gene, you can change the life. But we have a genetic system, so we are determined. And here, when we say that God is omniscient, actually we are talking about something called theistic we are talking about what is called theistic determinism. Theistic determinism means the kind of determinism we attribute to God. So God, when we say God knows everything, of course it has been determined. And then when God created universe, God knew what he was doing, and God had a plan for what he created. So theistic determinism means that everything has been determined by God. So if everything has been determined by God, although we think that we are free agents, we are free to do, but actually we are not free. So then the question about free will. Are you really free? Although apparently, seemingly, we are free, God knows that we are not free. Because God can tell what you are going to do another 10 years. What is going to happen to you another 10 years. So, understood in this manner, we can say that if theistic determinism is true, then free will cannot be existing. I mean, in other words, human beings are not really free. So, if God knows everything, including future, what will happen to the free will of people? Now, this is a very interesting question because we believe that we are free to do things. We make free decisions. Like, okay, this discussion about 2:30, some of you may decide, no, I don't want to go for that, or I want to go for that. Now, your decision that. But of course, it looks like your decision, if this view is correct, that you are not going to class today is determined before. So, although you may not know it, somebody else knows it. This is the kind of view. Now, we will see further. Theologians respond to this objection by saying that God is limitless and hence he does not have past or future. Aquinas says that God determines everything and then determines that they will be done freely. Now, there are two things. One thing is theologians respond to this objection by saying that God is timeless. So, one way to respond to this issue is that to say that God is timeless. When you say timeless, it means that the time is not applicable to God. So, with regard to God, they say that you can't talk about present, past or future. So, for God, because God is timeless, everything is present. Now, what it means is, then there does not arise the question of seeing the future. Now, as we said, this problem arises if you say that future is determined. So, they try to avoid this objection by saying that for God is timeless, because God is timeless, then it doesn't really matter to God. He doesn't see future, he just see only the present. But in present, that is the only time that is applicable to God. But of course, that reasoning doesn't seem very convincing. But anyhow, that is one way to respond to this. And then St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest Catholic theologians, he says that God determines everything and then determines that they will be done freely. Now that is again, you can look at that. According to him, God determines everything. And also in addition to that, he determines that it will be done freely. Then the problem is, God determines everything beforehand, and also he in addition to that, he determines that everything is done freely. So then everything is done freely is also determined by God. Now then, is it really freedom? Because if God determines everything, and then he also determines that everything will be done freely, but then that also is determined by God. If free will is also determined by God, what is the meaning of free will then? Free will also has been already determined. Now I know that this kind of argument may be not very familiar to you. But when we study world religions somewhat deeply, you need to really look at, real arguments, real reasons they have produced. Now you can simply say that, okay, God is omniscient, God knows everything. But what do we really mean that? Now in the Buddhist tradition itself, we use the word Sabbanyu, Sarvagnya to the Buddha, right? We say that Buddha is omniscient. Buddha is omniscient. But when we say Buddha is omniscient, don't you think that the same objection will be for that? If we say Buddha is omniscient, then we have to admit that Buddha knows past, Buddha knows present, Buddha knows future. How can Buddha know the future? Now, out of respect, we say Buddha knows everything. Buddha knows past, present, and future. But if Buddha can know future, future already should exist. That means future is already determined, right? Now, is that in accordance with Buddhism? Does that agree with the teaching of the Buddha? Any form of determinism? Can you say that it is agreeable to the teaching of the Buddha? You know, there is a serious philosophical question with this, because if you really believe that Buddha knows everything, of course, out of respect, we attribute this to the Buddha, but is that really true? Has the Buddha said that he is Sabbanyo? To my knowledge, Buddha has not said anywhere. What the Buddha has said is, Abhinyayang abhinyatang bhavetabbancha bhavitang pahatabbang pahinang me. Abhinyayang abhinyatang. I have known what has to be known. Abhinyayang. Abhinyaya means what has to be known. Bhavetabbancha bhavitang. I have practiced what is to be practiced. Pahatabbang pahinang me. I have removed what has to be removed. Tasma buddhosmi brahmana. Therefore I am called Buddha. Now you know, this statement doesn't say that Buddha knows everything. What Buddha knows is what has to be known. What do you mean by what has to be known? Basically we can say what is relevant to giving up, removing suffering, right? What is related to Four Noble Truths. What is related to arising and cessation of suffering. In the discourses, you find very often Buddha says that monks, even before and even now, I say only one thing. I say only arising of suffering and cessation of suffering. Buddha says that. But on the other hand, later Buddhist tradition attributes Sabbanyo to the Buddha. Okay? But then Buddha has never said that he is Sabbanyo. But if you say Buddha is Sabbanyo, Buddha knows everything, I mean, what does it mean to say that Buddha knows everything? Does it mean that if you give a computer, he knows how to manage the keyboard? Without anything? Now, you know, I mean, we have to, when you ask this kind of questions, what do we really mean that? So even in the Buddhist tradition, we have a debate about this. Because later tradition says that natassa additta midhatti kinchi. There is nothing that Buddha has not seen. Atho aviññāta ajānitabbang. There is nothing that cannot be known by the Buddha that was not known by the Buddha. Now there's a two different thing. Atho aviññāta ajānitabbang. When you say ajānitabbang, there is nothing that cannot be known by the Buddha. It is one thing. Buddha can know, but that does not mean that Buddha know it, right? Buddha can know. But when you say aviññāta, past participle, something that is not known was not there, then we definitely say that Buddha knew everything. There is nothing that the Buddha did not know. There is nothing that Buddha cannot know. Now, do you see the difference between the two? When you say something Buddha cannot know means, if Buddha wants, he can know that. If you give a computer to the Buddha, he will figure it out. So if he want to, he can know that. But when you say aviññāta, something not known, there is nothing that not known, I mean, that's a very broad statement. We say there is nothing that Buddha did not know. That means Buddha is knowing everything. But actually, people out of respect attribute these kinds of things to the Buddha, but we know that there are certain problems about it. In the early discourses, we don't find We don't find anything like that. But later, actually the stanza I said last, Natasadditta Midatti Kinchi, I think it comes in Patisambhida Magga to my memory. Now Patisambhida Magga is also belonging to the Pali canon. But Patisambhida Magga is somewhat later book because some Digabhanakas did not accept it to be the canon. So even in the ancient time about Patisambhida Magga, Buddha Vansa, Apadana, there were some Theravadins who did not think that these three books belong to the canon because they were very probably later. So then in these later books, they attribute Sabbanyu, Samanta Chakku to the Buddha. But early discourses, Buddha never said he is Sabbanyu. One place he says, if someone speaks about me correctly, he can say that I know Tivijja, Tissovijja. What are the Tissovijja? Ubbe Nivasa Chatupapata Asavakke. He never said that he knows everything. So, this whole issue of Sabbanyu, omniscience, is problematic. So here, when you say that God knows future, it is problematic. And then theologians respond to this objection by saying that God is timeless. But when you say God is timeless, everything is present, I mean, for me, that is not very convincing because although it can be timeless for God, for human beings and others, it is future, right? Future is future, past is past. And then St. Aquinas, what he says, God determines everything and determines that they will be done freely. I mean, it is complete determinism. If God determines everything, including free will, then again, it doesn't say much about freedom. Everything has been determined by God. So, nothing is free ultimately. Some others argue in defense of the omniscience that X doing something in future and God's knowing it because he can know everything are two different, not thin, T-H-I-N-G-S, two different things. Please correct it. Now, this is another way. Some others argue that in defense of omniscience, that X doing something in future and God's knowing it are two different things. Now, one way to answer this question will be, okay, I said that if God can see future, everything is determined. Because unless it is determined, we can't know it. Unless it exists already, we can't know it. Now, that is one objection. However, for this objection, you can answer another way. That another way would be some others who argue in defense of omniscience, who want to defend it, who want to say, yes, God is omniscient. He says that, now for example, we take situation like this. Okay, we say that X is doing Y at say 10 p.m. We say day, okay, something like that. X is doing Y at 10 p.m. such and such a day. Now this is something a person does. And then we say God knows that X is doing Y at. Now, this is something that somebody does. X is doing Y at 10 p.m. on 22nd December 2018 or something like that. And then we say God knows that X is doing that. Now, in a way you can say, this doesn't say that God determines it. This says that X will be doing this. And God is separate. God is just looking at. And God can see what is happening in the future. Okay? Now, God did not determine. But how can God see that? How can God see that? Okay, if it is not determined, how can God see that? Now, one way to defend this will be, well, according to causes and conditions, certain things happen, right? So whether X is doing Y at this particular time according to the causes and conditions? Somebody must be able to see. Now, although God, here we say God doesn't determine, but God knows all the conditions. When we say God knows everything, God can know every possible things in the world. So God can know what will happen after that, what will be caused by that, what it will cause, and all these things. If God can see, God can be just like this and looking at, and He sees how everything is moving and how everything is happening. So He can be away from the picture, but still. But then the question is, we are still saying that things are determined. I mean, in some manner, things are pre-planned, determined. I mean, in a way, we can say that in a broad manner. Suppose all of you, one example, is doing very well in the class, study very well. So your examination is end of December, we say, and then somebody can say, I can see that you all passed the examination. Some kind of course, because if all do very well studies very well, and then if all you do examination very well, then combining other factors, you can say that you passed the examination. But we can predict. But here, this goes much beyond the prediction. I mean, predictions we always make. Predictions we make, this is what is going to happen. But then, things change. But then, here what is happening is, God knows all the relationships, all the things. Now, when we say God knows everything, God knows all the objects, God knows all the happenings, plus God knows all the relations. God knows all the relations. When I say relations, I'm sure you are quite familiar, because in the P A T H A N A, what you have is relations, right? In the P A T H A N A, you have relations. Now, in the P A T H A N A, there are 24 relations. When you say that God knows everything, we have to decide that God knows objects, God knows events, and also God knows relations. Relations means how one particular thing is caused by another, what are the interconnection between all these things. Now, if God can know all these things, He doesn't have to determine. He can just see what is happening. Okay? But then still the problem is there. Then for some or other reason, the things must have been determined already. Then we don't say that God determines, but then we have to say that causes and conditions determine. So still there is some form of determinism, right? Causal determinism. Causality is also a form of determinism, right? Anyway, I know that this is a little bit difficult question for you to think, but try to think, because the one possibility after another. If you want to say, yes, God can see what is happening, then we say, maybe we are saying, okay, God did not determine it. He just keep on looking at it. But then, who determined it? Because in order for the God to see, He must be able to some causal relation, and according to which it happens. So, then we have to accept different types of determinism. That can be a causal determinism. So in the universe, there are many types of determinism. I said karma determinism, theistic determinism, natural determinism, and also we can say causal determinism. Causal determinism means all the causes and conditions getting together and determining the situation. Now, actually in Buddhism, in the Paticca this is a very interesting, challenging thing. To what extent causes and conditions determine? Isn't it a determinism? Although we don't accept the theistic determinism, what about the causal determinism? What about the Paticca? Isn't it a form of determinism? Okay, I will leave that question for you to think and read when you study Paticca, whether there is some form of determinism in that. How does Buddha say that people have free will? Buddha says that people have free will. Purisakara, right? Chanda, Chitta, Virya, Vimansa. So Buddhism says we have free will. But on the other hand, Buddhism says causality is there. So how can causality and free will combine? Now the same thing, how can God's omniscience and free will combine? Because if God knows everything, whether God determined or whether something else determines, but future is determined. So when we say for God can see future means future is already in the present. In the sense future is already determined. Now if that is true, then there is a serious question about, in the morning we were discussing ethics and ethical reasoning, right? There is a serious question about ethics or responsibility. If you are not free, then how can you be responsible for what you are doing? If you are not free. So the action and the responsibility to the action. So the determinism, free will and responsibility. These three things are very important, for you to think. So on the one hand we have various types of determinism, and then the problem of free will, and then we have the question of responsibility. We can describe this as moral responsibility. The problem of moral responsibility. Okay, problem of moral responsibility. In our ethics discussion also we will discuss this, but this is again a very interesting and important question that arises when we talk about, now all these problems, when we say that God is omniscient, arise. The persistence of suffering in the world has given rise to the question of compatibility of these three attributes taken together. Now the one last point is, if you consider to be God to be omnipotent, omnibenevolent and also omniscient, then people can question, how can there be suffering? Now if God omniscient, we can ask, if God is omniscient, between 1936 and 1945, 6 million Jewish people were killed. Now Jewish people were believing in God. Somebody can ask, if God knows everything, did not He see that? Why could not He prevent it? 6 million Jewish people were killed. And they were believers in God. Now, if God knows everything, how could that happen? The funny thing is, Second World War took place between both groups believe in the same God, okay? Both groups believe in the same God. The Christians who killed Jews are also believing in God. Jews who got killed also believe in God. Now, on the other hand, we say God is omnipotent, can do anything, omnibenevolent, He is all good, and also omniscient. He knows everything. Now, when you combine these three things, the serious question is, how can suffering arises in the world? How can suffering consist in the world which was created by God? How can Second World War take place? How it took place in the world created by God, given these three characteristics? Now you see the issue. On the one hand, it is very easy to say, okay, God knows everything, God can do anything, and God is good. But then when you put these questions, the claims in a particular context, then you can see that problematic. So the persistence of suffering in the world has given rise to the question of the compatibility of three attributes. You put these three things together, then of course, how can they exist? If you believe in such a being as God with all these good characteristics, but then world should be a very nice place to live. Later we will see, some people say that we have created God, not that God has created us, we have created God the way we want. Now, it's interesting if you see, suppose we believe in somebody who can do anything. Okay? We believe in somebody who can do anything. But if that person is not a good person, then what happens? A person who can do anything. I mean, if it is a bad person, then what? Will you be feeling safe with him? There is a person who can do anything. So, he has to be a good person, right? If a person can do anything, if that person is a bad person, then this world will be a very bad place to live. But if there is a person who can do anything, but he is good, no bad at all, then of course you are safe. So the omnipotence, omnibenevolence, and also omniscience. Then if he can seize everything. Now, if you really combine these three characteristics, if such God is protecting you, it will be very good, isn't it? Because nothing to fear. That God can do anything, then you are sure that he will not do anything bad because he is omnibenevolent, and also he knows everything. So you can see, on the one hand, when we believe in such a God, the world can be a very safe place for you to live. But then unfortunately, against this concept of safety, when you look at the world is not like that. So the First World War, Second World War, after that what happened in the Cambodia, another 1 million people were killed. There are many incidents like that. And then incident that happened in Africa, incident that happening in Middle East, and all these things. So how are you going to account for these things? So that's why there is a problem of compatibility of the three characteristics taken together. You put all these three characteristics together to one person, fine, but you look at the world he created. Now, at the very beginning of discussion, I said that the God is the creator and the sustainer of the universe. Not only God created this world, he also sustains, he also maintains this universe. Now, if God, takes that responsibility, then there is this, the question. Okay, now these are the three, the main. Let me move into one more. Omnipresence. This means that God transcends all limitations of space. God is present in all things as their immanent cause and as their creator and sustainer. God is the infinite being, and omnipresence follows from his infiniteness. Okay, another quality is not as strong as the other three we already discussed, but omnipresence means God is everywhere. Now you remember I said that the concept of God is, although concept of God was conceived as a person, but this concept of God is not a person. So the idea is that omnipresent means God is everywhere. Because if you say that God is in one physical place, then of course God is occupying a physical place. That means God is a person. God has a body, right? Now, I say that I am here, that means my body is here. So it occupies some space. If you say that God is in such and such a place, then you have to admit that God has a body and God occupies some place. But then of course God becomes limited. Do you see why God is described to be omnipresent? Because otherwise God becomes limited. And initially, God is the infinite being. Omnipresence follows from his infiniteness. Now when we say God is the infinite being, God is infinite, no limit. Actually, God doesn't have limitations of space and time. So we say God is everlasting. Also we say that God is omnipresent. In other words, God is at all places, at all times. Another way to say that would be, God is not limited by space or time. Okay, God is not limited by space or time. So this is the idea of omnipresence. God is present in all things as their immanent cause. Immanent cause means it is from God all things emanates. All things flow from God. So God is the infinite source of everything. From that infinite source, everything flows, comes out, something like that. So the God is immanent cause and they are creator and sustainer. God is the infinite being and omnipresence follows from his infiniteness. Now these are the four main characteristics we wanted to discuss. To summarize again, God is omnipotent, can do anything. God is omnibenevolent, God is all good. God is omniscient, God knows everything, and also God is omnipresent, God is present everywhere. So, these are the basic characteristics of God when we say, use the word God. So, God is infinite being. Now, when we say God is infinite, actually God is limitless. That is the meaning. So, the moment we use the term infinite, that means he is unlimited. Now, we say God is unlimited in goodness, unlimited in power, unlimited in knowledge. So all these things really follow from this one particular epithet or attribute. In other words, you must be able to say that now if you say that God is infinite being. Now infinite being means limitless. When you say God is infinite being, so God is infinite or limitless, we can say infinite in power, infinite in goodness, infinite in knowledge. And also we can say when we infinite, no space, time, limitation, right? So actually all these things follow from this one main epithet. When you say God is infinite being, infinite, limitless. Limitless in what manner? Limitless in power, he can do anything. Limitless in knowledge, he knows everything. Limitless in goodness, he is perfect, nothing wrong, can't do anything bad. And also no space-time limitations, he is all over the place, he is all over the time. So you can, I'm just trying to make you understand when we say, when the theistic religions use the concept of God, now you can see they are not just talking about some God living in some place, like that. Of course, that was the original idea. If you read Old Testament of Bible, it was very much like that. God is in heaven, and you go and you born in the kingdom of heaven, sitting either side of God, singing songs, you live happily. But that was the idea. But you can say subsequently this idea was developed philosophically, religiously. Today when we say God, actually it doesn't mean some particular person who is in the heaven, who has a body, who has a big beard or whatever. Now when we say God today, it is that kind of God we are talking about, infinite being, no limit. So actually you can't draw this God, you can't paint this God, right? Because how can you paint? The God is all over. I mean spread all over, spread through time and also limitless. So therefore this is the basic concept what we mean by when we say God is an infinite being. Okay, we will move into what we call metaphysical attributes, but before I move into these metaphysical attributes, I like to see, do you have any questions or anything you need to clarify about this? Anything that you think you don't understand? particularly when we were talking about omniscience, I mean, everything that God knows everything, you see that there are some very serious theoretical issues about free will, determinism, moral responsibility. Now these issues are not only for the concept of God. Even when you study Buddhist philosophy, even with Paticca Samuppada, causation, you have similar problems, similar issues, how can you describe? But in particularly with God, when we say God knows everything, God can do everything, and then we are faced with the problem, how can we talk about free will? Are we free? If you are not free, then you are not responsible for what you are doing, right? Even in the legal system, you have to be free to be responsible. I pull out a gun and I say, do this. Then you do it because you don't want to get killed. But court will not punish you because court knows that you did it under duress, right? You are not responsible. So you are not responsible. If you are not responsible, you don't have a moral responsibility. You are not responsible for your action. Because if you are ordinary, then you will not do that. You did it simply because you were forced to do it. This is a moral question. So how do you really bear the responsibility of your actions? Okay, anyhow, no questions? Everything was crystal clear? Okay, fine, no problem. But, I really need you to think about these issues more. Okay, one thing is I know that you don't have much material to read, but as I said the other day, actually, this on these things, there is so much material available in the web for you to read, and articulating the issues and the problems that arise from that. So please go into this literature. I am here just outlining some of the issues you are faced with when we are studying the world religion. So to understand the concept of God, actually you can see that it is not a simple concept, it is really a concept involving a lot of religious, philosophical, psychological issues. Okay, all right. In the absence of any questions, we will move into the metaphysical attributes of God: simplicity, timelessness, immutability, and impassibility. Now what are these things? Now these are called metaphysical attributes. Actually these are called metaphysical attributes. Metaphysical means things that lie beyond our sensory perception. That is metaphysical. But of course concept of God itself is a metaphysical concept according to that definition. But when we say God is omniscient, omnipotent, all good, and etc., we are talking about God as if as a person. But then when we say metaphysical, these are more related to the nature of God. Okay? Nature in the sense, when we take the concept of God, how are we going to define this concept? Because you don't want to say God is a person, but then how are you going to define? So these are some of the characteristics. Number one is simplicity. God is a simple and not a composite substance. The infinite being cannot be made of finite parts. This also means that God is not corporeal. No, God doesn't have a physical body, does not have a body made of parts. Now we say that God is simple. Now when they say that God is simple, what they mean by this is, what is opposite to simple is composite. Composite means made of parts. Now the one idea is this: if you say something is made of parts, made of aspects, you can add some more aspect to it. Now if you say you can add more aspect, then means as it is not perfect. But on the other hand, by definition, God is perfect. If God is perfect, you can't make it more perfect by adding something. So if you say God is composite or made of parts, Either you can reduce some parts or you can add some parts. In either way, either you reduce parts or add parts, then you automatically admit that God is not perfect. If you think that some parts are not necessary, then God is not perfect. If you think that God needs more parts, then again God is not perfect. So that is why they say that God is not composite object. Then they say God is simple. Simple is one particular thing. Now again you may be thinking, okay, what is this? Actually these are some of the what we call metaphysical questions throughout Middle Ages. The Christian theologians have been debating. Now here you can see gradually the theologians are refining the concept of God. Because you present the concept of God, then those people who do not like the concept of God put forth objections. When you see these objections, we again refine the concept of God. So in other words, you want to define God in such a manner, nobody can really object to it. So that is why you have these what we call metaphysical attributes. So God is a simple and not a composite substance. The infinite being cannot be made of finite parts, because by definition you say that God is infinite. So if God is infinite, you can't have parts, because parts are all finite, limited. I give you this as an example for you to understand how the medieval Christianity, medieval scholasticism think about these things. When I use the word scholasticism, Abhidharma is also our scholasticism, Buddhist. But then similarly, you have in the Middle Ages, Christian theologians have held many views. So one thing, when they wanted to, when they were trying to define God, they said that God is simple. So God is not composite. God is not made of parts. Okay. So again you can see that here they are not talking about God with the body. Okay. So the whole idea is that this also means that God is not corporeal. That means God doesn't have a body. Because if you say God has a body, then body can be longer, shorter, fatter, bigger. Now those things cannot be applicable to God. Okay, the body can be beautiful or not beautiful, or many types of things. So none of such attribute will applicable to God. So therefore, God doesn't have a body. Does not have a body made up of parts. So one way to define God will be God is simple. God is a simple phenomenon. Multiplicity, the opposite of simplicity, indicates that things can be added to it, which is to be imperfect. God is not a member of a class that shares a common characteristic. Its attributes poses a problem to the Christian belief of the Trinity. Now, of course, thinking furthermore, now when you say simplicity, opposite that will be simplicity. When you say something is simple, you mean it is only one thing. But the opposite simplicity is multiplicity. Now, multiplicity means two or more. Two or more. Now, if you say multiplicity, the opposite of simplicity indicates that things can be added to it, which is to be imperfect. Now, if you say God is multiple, again there is no end to it, because you can add more and more. But if you say God is simple, by definition, you cannot add anything, right? Because God is only one. But if you say God is many, how many? You can make it 3, 4, 5, 6 and so on. There is no end to it. So that's why they say God is one, not God is many. That's why one way to say that God is simple, not plural. Okay, simple, plural. One, many. So God is not many, God is one. And so on. God is not a member of a class that shares a common characteristic. That's another way to describe the simplicity of God. Now you have class and member. Okay. Now in the classical Aristotelian philosophy, this concept is class and member. You go by these words. You talk about the genus and then you talk about species. Genus and species. Now genus means class. You can say genus is, let's for example, we can say genus is animal. What are the species? You can say dog, cat, cow, lion, and so on. Now do you see the difference? Genus and species. In other words, you can say genus means class. Species means member. So you have a class and within the class you can have members. Now genus, if you take animal, then you can say within genus you can have different types of animals like cats, dogs, lions and so on. You can say birds, then you can have different types of birds. You can have trees, then you can have different types of trees. Genus and species. Okay, that's the concept. Now here it says, God is not a member of a class that shares a common characteristics. Now for example, when you say class or genus is animal, we say that all these are animals. What we say is all these share the characteristic of being animal. When we say genus as bird, then all the birds share the characteristic of being a bird. When we say genus as tree, all the trees share some characteristic common to all trees. Now what they say is, God is not a member of a class having a characteristic. So in other words, all the species, I mean everything, everybody in the universe, we can include in this category, but not God. Because we include in this category based on the characteristic. We include in the animal category because all animals have some animal characteristics. All birds have some bird characteristic. Okay, all human beings have characteristics of human beings. But like in that manner, this says that God is not a member of a class. In other words, if you say God as a class, that class does not have members. Okay? God is only one. If you take God as a class, that class doesn't have members. If you say animal class, there are so many animals. Tree class, there are many trees. But if you take God, God doesn't have members in that class. So God is not a member of a class that shares common characteristics. Now this attribute poses a problem to the Christian belief in the Trinity. Also it has led to many theologians debate on how can God have attributes. Now if God is one, there is a very well-known problem. Now well-known problem is, I described to you in Judaism, what they believe is monotheism, believe in one God. Now when it comes to Christianity, they say that one God, but within one God, they say that Trinity. So the idea of Trinity. So Trinity means actually combination of three. Combination of three. We say that in simple English, we say Father, Son and Holy Ghost. Now in the Christian belief, they say that God is Father, Son and Holy Ghost. Trinity. That means within one. Three in one actually, concept is that. Like you have three things in one concept of God. But the problem is this. If God is one, if God is simple, how can there be three within one simple God. Because according to Christianity, God has one aspect of being the Father, one aspect of being the Son, and then Holy Ghost, the third one. The God, Father, and then Jesus is the Son, and then Holy Ghost is the another idea. Now, how can there be three? Now, this is a very interesting and important theological problem. Because it started from Judaism. In Judaism, it's purely a monotheistic God. There is only one God, no parts, nothing. Now, in the Christianity, when you have this concept three, theologians argue, how can God be three? Actually, one very important and serious theological controversies with Christianity, say for example Judaism has and also Islam has, is this problem. Now, Islam came about 600 years after the Christianity. But if you look at Islamic concept of God, it is very similar to the Judaic concept of God, not the Christian concept of God. I'm sure you studied world religions, right? Did you or did you not? Okay, I mean, maybe do one or two sessions on world religions, but I thought that you already know the world religions. But anyhow, you have to have some idea, because I assume, I thought that you study world religions here. But I can, now it is little too late, but still I will try to do some lectures on Christianity, Islam and Judaism, because it is very important to understand. If you know the basic conceptions of these three religions, you can understand what I'm talking much better, okay? If you don't know anything about Judaism, Christianity and Islam, then it is very difficult. Anyway, read something, but I will try to give one session or something for that, but anyhow we will see. So this attribute poses a problem to the Christian belief in the Trinity. Also it has led to many theological debates on how can God have attributes, right? Like this kind of, if God is simple. Now, initially I say God has attributes in the sense we attribute certain qualities, but that doesn't mean that God has parts or something. When we say God is omniscient, we are not talking about one part of God or anything. We are talking about the characteristic of being God. But then here the problem is, if you say God is three, Father is different from Son, both Father and Son are different from Holy Ghost, then of course God is not simple. So the issue is here, on the one hand, you define God as simple. Then the problem is, how can you reconcile it with the concept of Trinity? So that is the idea. Okay, that's the problem you can remember, keep in mind. Then we will move into the number two, timelessness, eternity. God is not limited by time. God exists forever without a beginning or an end. He exists outside time. It is said that this attribute is due to the influence of Platonism. In early period, Christianity accepted that God acted in time, remembered past, knew future, and acted in the present. Like omnipresence, these two derives from God's infinity. Now, timelessness. Earlier I showed you omnipresence. That means God is everywhere. Now this is the other characteristic of the same category. Omnipresence and also timelessness. Timelessness means God is every time, all the time. I mean, no time distinction, no space distinction. So the omnipresence and timelessness are two basic characteristics again that deriving from when you say God is infinite. When you say God is infinite, it also indicates that God is timeless and also God is spaceless. So no time and space constraints to God. God is not limited by time, nor is he limited by space. So timeless means eternity. It is said that this attribute is due to influence of Platonism, but that is philosophy. We don't want to go into that at this juncture. In early Christianity, now this is different from early Christianity. If you look at the Bible, Old Testament, God is not timeless or the spaceless. God is living in one place. He was acting with Jew people. He talked to Abraham. And then when Abraham and his people were not behaving well, God was mad. He punished them. So, according to early belief, God is not like this. So you can see this concept is gradually, concept of God was made more philosophically subtle by the subsequent theologians, okay. So but very initial story in the Bible, that's why you need to read Old Testament. God is like any other God, He is the God of Jew people, very limited. This whole concept of Jew people believe that they are the chosen people by God. They are the chosen people. Actually, the one big difference between Christianity and Judaism is Judaism says that the God is their God. Okay? But then Jesus' idea is Catholic. What is the meaning of word Catholic? Actually, we say Catholicism, right? So, what is the meaning of this word? Catholic. Actually, this means universal. So, Jesus showed that, Jesus wanted to prove that God is not only Jew people's God, God is Catholic. So, the Catholic means God is universal. God is for everybody. Okay. Now, it is interesting, even today, you can't be a Jew unless you are born a Jew. That nationality and religion are both connected, okay? Do you see the connection? You have to be a born Jew in order to be a Jew, okay? But then Jesus Christ, although he was a Jew, he said, no, God is Catholic, in the sense God is universal. Now that is why, according to Christianity, spread all over the world. But Judaism was not spreading all over the world because it is only for the Jew people. But then Jesus, the function was to show that, the God is for everybody. So that is why this concept of Catholic, we pronounce it as Catholic or Catholic, but in order to emphasize that meaning, Catholic, like it's universal. So the whole idea is that the Jesus came up with this. So the spacelessness is omnipresence, timeless is that God is eternal. But this is different from the traditional biblical concept of God. Okay. Then number 3 is immutability. Immutability is, this means that God does not undergo change. Immutability. God doesn't change. God does not undergo change. Change is said to imply capacity for improvement which God cannot have. Since God is infinitely perfect, there is no room for change in Him. Now immutability is no change. God cannot be changed. Now when you say something is changing, that indicates that either it can be changing for better or it can be changing for worse. Like human beings, every day we change. But in our case, every day we become older and older and older, right? We don't become younger and younger and younger. Okay. But when you say change, change can be either for good or for bad. So when you say something is subject to change, that is considered to be, in this thinking, imperfection. So God can't be changed. But then if you say God is changing, then it is a kind of, you admit that God can be improved. But gods can't be improved because God is perfect, right? If God is perfect, God cannot be improved. So that is the idea. So God is, immutability is that. So change is said to imply the capacity for improvement, which God cannot have. Since God is infinitely perfect, there is no room for change in Him. So God is infinitely perfect, absolutely perfect. So if God is absolutely perfect, you can't say that God is subject to change. So immutability. It's further understood that change takes place within time, and God, who is timeless, cannot change. So another thing is, we say that God is timeless. Now if God is timeless, changing takes place within time. You are today 16 years old, tomorrow you become 17 years old. So time. But then here, God is timeless. Time doesn't apply to God. So no change. The simplicity too is taken as implying immutability, for only composite things can undergo change. Now earlier we talked about simplicity of God. Now if we believe that God is simple, one substance, again you can't change. Because they say that immutability is only for composite things. Things which have parts. So the simple thing cannot change. Now you see these ways of interpreting God in different manner is ultimately the effort of creating a perfect concept of God. You know, the immune to criticism by other people. Now the fourth thing is impassibility. Not impossibility, impassibility, okay? Impassibility means, this means that God is not affected by anything. Impassible. So God is impassible means God cannot be affected by anybody. For example, you go to God and cry, but then God is not going to move. He is not affected. You can't influence God. So this means that God is not affected by anything. Although God created, sustains and governs the world, God is not affected by anything in the world. The world depends on God for its existence, for being and qualities, but God does not depend on the world. Now you see, this impassibility is a very, very important characteristic. Impassible means God is not affected, God is not influenced, or God is not moved by anything that happens in the world. Okay. God created the world, but God is impassible. Now when you hear this, you may get some kind of answer to the Second World War. Right? You can say that God created world, but God is impassible. After that, God is not affected by that. Right? So if God is impassible, yes, in the Second World War, so many Jews were killed, but it has nothing to do with God. I mean, that is one way to answer this, isn't it? Do you see that? When you say God is impassible, God is not affected by anything. So here, although God creates, sustains and governs the world, God is not affected by anything. But again, you can ask, if God is governing and sustaining world, how can God be silent about when all these people are killed? Okay, that you can ask. But at the same time, you can also answer, impassibility means God is not responsible, God is not affected by, what happens. This world depends on God. So the world depends on God. World's being means world's existence depends on God. But vice versa is not true. That means, although world depends on God, God does not depend on the world. Okay. So the impassibility is another very important characteristic when we look at the nature of God, because impassibility says God is not affected. But again, you can see that this attribute is in tension with the biblical God, who not only acts on people he created, but also is affected by their distress, becoming angry upon their sinning, taking pity on them in their misery, etc. Now do you see this point? Although we say God is impassible, but if you take the biblical story of God, the story of God in the Bible, you can see that Bible God is not like that actually. He is affected by, he is influenced by what happens in the human world, according to the Bible. So on the one hand, in theology, you have this concept of impassibility, and then in theology, in philosophical study, you have this, in Bible, you have the God, being affected. I think I confused it. So in theology, you have the concept of impassibility. But in the Bible, you have a God who is being affected by human beings. Now this is what I am trying to say. So God who not only acts on people, He created, but also affected by their distress. When people are in distress, God notices it. Okay, becomes angry upon their sinning. Now according to the Jewish story, they believe that every time they were sinning, they were behaving, badly, God punished them. You remember I told you this story, some of my friends, when I asked about the Second World War, and in the entire Jewish history, Jewish people have been persecuted by people. I asked why, and then the answer was God was testing them. God was testing their belief in God. And also the part is that God was punishing them. So there are many occasions where God punished the people. And then at one point He created a huge flood and destroyed the whole thing. And He created a ship, according to the story, only for the good people to get into the ship and escape. Now all these stories you find in the Bible. So all these stories are against this idea of impassibility. You say something, God is impassible, but when you look at the biblical concept, God, you can see that God is not impassible. Another difficulty is that if God is impassible, how can He be compassionate and merciful? Now, on the other hand, the positive side, you say God is compassionate. You say that God is merciful. But then if He is not affected, how can you become compassionate if somebody is not suffering? How can you be merciful if somebody is not sinning? Idea is somebody sins and then mercifully God pardons the sins. Somebody is suffering, compassionately God intervenes. Now, if God is impassible, on the other hand, from the good side, how can you say God is compassionate or merciful? Being compassionate implies that God is moved by the misery of the world. Think, does the Buddha's Mahakaruna mean that the Buddha is affected by the miseries of the world? Now, this is a question for the Buddhist. We say Buddha is Mahakaruna, right? Buddha has Mahakaruna, great compassion. What is the Buddha's attitude? When people see in distress, Buddha gets upset. Does that mean that Buddha gets distressed? How do you explain Mahakaruna? Buddha has Mahakaruna, but then does that mean that Buddha gets sad when people are in suffering? When then people are suffering and dying, Buddha says to Ananda, Ananda, I can't go Pindapata today, I can't eat today. Can something like that happen to the Buddha? No. Anyway, when we say Buddha has Mahakaruna, up to you to think, now we are also saying something like that Buddha is not affected, right? But although we don't have this particular quality, we don't describe Buddha as impassible, right? But on the other hand, it is true for the Buddha also, right? Buddha did not create the world, it's true. At the same time, to the suffering world, Buddha does something. For example, in the Vishala city, when Vishala city was affected by 3 types of dangers, was Buddha silent? No. Buddha went to Vishala and Buddha tried to do something, right? That is out of Mahakaruna. But does that mean that Buddha is sad about it, upset about it? No, right? So, you can see that, the Buddha has Mahakaruna. But the fact that Buddha has Mahakaruna doesn't necessarily mean that Buddha is sad. But of course, on the other hand, Buddha notices that something is seriously wrong. Buddha doesn't get emotional. Can't you say the same thing about God? Of course, you say that God can't be compassionate or God can't be merciful if God is not moved by those things. But what about the Buddhas? If that is true for Buddha, can't we say the same thing about God? God is not moved by, but of course God sees that something has to be done, isn't it? I'm not supporting Christianity, but I mean, logically thinking, if we say the same thing about Buddha, if we say that Buddha can have Mahakaruna without getting upset, why not God? God can also be compassionate without getting upset, right? Can't he? When God sees that something is wrong in the world, he can help people, but he doesn't have to get upset about it. So without getting upset, without getting sad, but still can God do things, right? So anyhow, for you to think, so if we say that Buddha has Mahakaruna, if we believe that Buddha did not get upset about things, then how can we, I mean, what about the God? Now also we have God's personhood essential for theism. If God is not a person, how can he do all things he said to have done? But not only impassibility, but also the rest of the metaphysical attributes become problematic to God's personhood. Actually, I don't have much time to go into this. What I will do is I will talk about this little bit more in our next session. But let me briefly wind up this discussion for today. Okay, this is a quotation for attributes of God. I think that the metaphysical attributes are perfections for several reasons, so it gives. Okay, what I would like to do is, let me just summarize what I did up to this point, and I will have little bit more discussion on this concept of impassibility in my next discussion. Basically, we looked at 4 main characteristics of God: omnipotence, omnibenevolence, omniscience, and also omnipresence, right? And then these are considered to be, actually first 3 are considered to be the main: omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient. And then omnipresence and timelessness also. And then we also looked at what I call metaphysical attributes of God. Those are more to the philosophical analysis of the concept of God. One thing that came up in this discussion is, on the one hand, in the biblical literature, Bible, Old Testament, you see God basically as a person who is acting in the history. However, these characteristics we see in the theological explanation of God. In the theological explanation of God, you can see that God is made an impersonal, universal, infinite existence, not as a person. Okay. Now these are the 2 main different things. To repeat, in the biblical story, God is a person. God is acting in the history. God is punishing people. God is guiding people. Okay. God is really interfering with human affairs. That is the biblical God. But the philosophical God or theological God with this characteristic is not a person but a universal concept. Okay. So finally, when Christian, Jewish or Muslim people say God, now you have some idea. Now most of the ordinary people, when say God, they must be talking about the personal God, God as a person. But in the philosophical, theological discussions, when they talk about God, you have to understand they are not talking about that person God, they are talking about the God with these characteristics, some kind of universal principle. Okay, I think I will wind up this discussion for today. Do you have any questions? Okay. I'm not waiting for questions today, so maybe. But anyhow, think more about. We will have another. Pardon me. Okay. Good. Yes, sir. Okay. Free? Freedom of thought. Okay. Yeah. Okay, his question is whether there is a connection between free will and freedom of thought. In fact, two are connected, but two are two different things. When we say free will, that is our internal psychological quality we have, we believe, to make decision to do something or not to do something. That is the free will. I mean, that's a chetana. Chetana is according to Abhidhamma Chetasika, right? So that is a kind of Chetasika, to use Buddhist language. That's a Chetasika we have. However, when you say freedom of thought, it is a different thing. What we mean by you have freedom in the religion, have your own thinking. In other words, Buddha will not say do this or don't do this. Now the best example is the Kalama Sutta we discussed in the morning. Now for the Kalamas, Buddha say don't accept these things. But then you think, in Pali, Yada tumhe kalama attanava janeyatha. Attanava janeyatha means kalamas, when you know for yourself. When you know for yourself that something is good, take it. When you know for yourself that something is bad, give up it. Now that is the freedom of thought. But if you don't have freedom of thought, then Buddha say, Kalamas, do what I say. Then no freedom of thought. But what the Buddha said to Kalamas is, Kalamas, when you know for yourself. So knowing for yourself means you have the freedom. That's the difference. So free will is a Chetasika. And then freedom of thought is, something approved by the religion. You can think on your own. It's okay to think. But according to some religions, you don't have a freedom of thinking. What is good is given by God. You can't question it, something like that. Okay, we will wind up for today and then we will meet in next week discussion. Okay, thank you.